It's official now. Yonge-Dundas Square is now Sankofa Square. It had a renaming at Toronto City Council this week. It was a meeting that turned bizarre at times, including councillors calling their fellow councillors racist for asking questions about the cost, about the process, about whether other parts of the city are going to be renamed based on these same issues, the same political agenda. All of that happening in a meeting that was over the top at times, including this outburst from Councillor Shelley Carroll.
Connect the dots. Connect the dots. Am I in a tacit way calling people racist right now? Oops, I guess I am. And you know what is the trickiest thing that racists like to do? They like to act like the worst thing in the world is calling someone a racist and be all outraged because, oh, are you calling me a racist? You know what's outrageous? Being one. That's what we should be outraged about. Someone clearly being one.
Carroll wasn't the only one using written terms like racist in the past. We've heard from Chris Moyes, we've heard from Gord Perks. At the meeting, Councillor Amber Morley described those who opposed it as racist, and others stood up just to say, we appreciate Councillor Morley's words. One of the councillors who did vote against the renaming and asked several questions is Councillor Bradford. So, Councillor Bradford, you were one of the people being called a racist because you opposed this, along with an awful lot of Torontonians, 72% according to one poll. So, how did you feel being called a racist by your fellow councillor, somebody that you have to work with in the middle of a debate on a public policy issue?
Well, people call me a lot of things, but it's pretty disparaging to have councillors conduct themselves like that. There were a lot of problems with this process. It's a lot of money being allocated to something that the majority of Torontonians are offside with. And again, just because you're calling into question decisions that are in front of City Council right now, for very good reasons, doesn't make anybody a racist. And it was disappointing to see how some of my colleagues conducted themselves. And I think it's become very divisive. And they got their head in the sand. They're not listening to folks, and that's why people are getting cynical on City Hall.
Yeah, I live in the ward that this is happening in. I can walk to Yonge-Dundas Square in about 10 minutes. The name is not the problem at Yonge-Dundas Square. It is supposed to be a central gathering place in our city. It's supposed to be something that draws in people, is an attraction. It's none of those right now. It's sometimes an open air sewer, sometimes it's an open air drug den. Crime there. It is not living up to its potential. It's got all kinds of problems, and the name is not the issue. You went down and talked to people in the square, both people milling around, but also businesses, while council was meeting. Did you hear anybody saying, yeah, we got to get that name off and call it Sankofa?
That's right. I walked over there in the lunch hour just immediately before the debate and talked to folks in the square. I probably chatted with a dozen people and walked into some of the adjacent businesses, and I couldn't find a single person who thought that this was needed or was a good idea. And when you take it in the context of this is a city and a mayor who just ushered in a record-breaking tax increase of nearly 10%, to see us throwing away $1 million on a renaming that was railroaded through by the mayor last December, when it's a question of priorities and scarce funds and resources. I heard from business owners on the square that talk about people who have died in Yonge-Dundas Square, the homelessness issue, the safe injection sites, the fact that it's often an area full of crime and criminal activity. And yet, as you've said, this is the most prominent intersection in the country. It was intended to be a destination for tourism, for Torontonians, for performance space. And that's not what exists there right now. I asked questions of the general manager of Yonge-Dundas Square. What do you need right now? Name change wasn't on his list, but security enhancements was on the list. Accessibility.
Yeah. There's accessibility issues there. There's security enhancements that need to be done. But you also tried to get a clear answer on the money, how much this will cost. Now, the supporters tried to make it sound like asking about the money was racist. They tried to make it sound, if you asked about the process, that you were racist. But there is a concern. This was originally designed to be a square that would have, potential for naming rights for a corporation to come in, make it General Motors, square at Yonge-Dundas, and that would pay for performances or things like that. That's gone now. That's off the table. But when this idea of renaming it Sankofa was sprung on everyone last minute, last December, I was down at City Council for this. I mean, you're obviously there, but I'm down there as Councillor Chris Moyse walks out. We've just been told the city's going to put renaming Dundas Street on pause. Moyse turns around and says, "Don't worry, this is not going to cost taxpayers money. It's going to come out of my community development fund, the Section 33 funds." Well, that's, once it gets over to the city and it's in city coffers, that is taxpayers' money. It's supposed to benefit the city.
Yeah, they're
It
trying to
went
hand their hat.
from a
They're
small
trying to.
amount to, you asked the question, how high can it go? And it was just shy of $1 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's $965,000, and so call it $1 million. The cost has already escalated since this was approved in December, and I suspect it will continue to escalate. And look, the reality is, whether it's Section 37 development related dollars or tax dollars, they're all public funds. And when we talk about the improvements that are actually needed for Yonge-Dundas Square around security, around accessibility, if we're not paying for that with Section 37 dollars, then we're paying for it with the property tax base. And so if you're taking money from one account, and trying to say that that doesn't come at the expense of dollars that could be spent
But
elsewhere, it's all nonsense.
But if we
So,
get anywhere near that 965,000, or let's say it's just the mid-range point now of 600,000, that goes well above the Section 37 money that Councillor Moyse says he has, which is what, a few $100,000? So it is going to cost taxpayers, isn't it?
It is. It is. And again, it's if you're spending those Section 37 dollars on a square renaming, that means you can't spend them on the type of upgrades that would actually make Yonge-Dundas Square a safer, more comfortable place to be. The security measures, the accessibility measures that the person who actually operates the square, the general manager, said, those are the priorities. Those are the things that we need. So if we decide to take that money that was allocated to the square and spend it on a renaming, it means we can't invest it into those things that are actually needed, which then will require taxpayer dollars to go and fund the gap. So, they're kind of being too cute by half here. They're being a bit dishonest and disingenuous with people. And aside from that, I mean, you've got 32,000 signatures on a petition saying, hey, stop the madness here. Consult and talk to Torontonians. Again, this is the most prominent intersection in the country, and to try and railroad this thing through without speaking or listening to people, and in fact to even admonish them for speaking up, to imply that they're somehow racist for asking these very reasonable questions. I think that's disgusting. I think it's a failure of leadership, and these councillors should be ashamed of themselves.
I have no problem having them rename or name something Sankofa. Although Councillor Moyse says there's a Sankofa Park in the ward, I couldn't find it on Google Maps. I couldn't find it when I looked at the city website, and I've never run into it, and I'm pretty active in the area. But I have no problem with them naming something Sankofa, or he says this is to give a space to Toronto's significant Black community. I have no problem with that, but I do have a problem with taking a name off under shoddy scholarship and bad pretenses of claiming Henry Dundas was something he wasn't, and then renaming it with something that is related to the slave trade as well. So it boggles my mind that they would do that. And then your colleague, Councillor Stephen Holiday, he tried asking the mayor, who made a whole speech about, we've got to rename this square because Henry Dundas was so awful on slavery. She made statements that were fundamentally false, completely untrue. And then Councillor Holiday said, well, based on your speech, Mayor, do you plan on bringing back renaming Dundas Street? Because it hasn't been canceled. It's just on pause. And she got livid with him, was yelling at him in the council chambers and saying, this is not what we're talking about now. It absolutely is. If you're going to make a whole speech that we can't have anything named after Dundas because of all these false accusations against him, well, that tells me that she is going to bring back renaming Dundas Street. What's your thoughts?
Well, she definitely didn't want to take it off the table, and she definitely didn't want to answer Stephen Holiday's question. And I think it's a pretty reasonable one, because this whole Yonge-Dundas Square renaming came out of that discussion and that decision around Dundas Street, which she intentionally paused. If she wanted to take it off the table, she would have taken it off the table. And that was done very deliberately to not do that. Whether that's to appease her base or make a performative gesture, you know, those would be questions we could ask her and see if she gives us a straight answer on it. But these, you know, at the end of the day, I've heard some people have a tough time squaring the fact that, okay, we're going to spend $1 million to rename the square, but, you know, it's still located on Dundas Street, and Dundas Street still exists across the entire city. There's other stuff that's got Dundas in the name. So on one hand, you're saying it's so important that we have to rename the square, but it's also not important enough to do the other things that would come with it. And again, regardless of how you feel with it, there's some hypocrisy there. And I think the mayor's trying to thread a needle here, but it's not really going over well with the general public. And
the
it
issues
leaves us with more questions.
the issues that we talked about that happen at Dundas Square, those are writ large across the city as well. The city is not working as it should. And when you can't get garbage picked up off street corners properly, when the homeless situation has moved well out of the downtown core into all parts of the city, when you're dealing with issues like that and drug paraphernalia in parks literally everywhere,
Yeah.
yeah, people are going to get annoyed at this. And I'm sure you hear from your constituents.
I hear from everyone. I hear from people across the city. You know, crime statistics are through the roof. They're up. They're significantly up this year over last year. Perhaps most concerningly, break-in-enters and violent altercations in people's homes, that is up this year. You know, the drug use is up. Encampments have doubled. And in fact, the mayor's proposal as an encampment strategy is to basically say, we're not going to clear encampments anymore. That was voted on and passed at council. I'm paraphrasing and simplifying a report, but effectively it says we're not going to clear them anymore. And so, you know, the parks have to be for the public. Everybody needs safe access to the parks, and the type of activity that's taking place in some of these encampments means that you don't get safe access to a park. It's not just a downtown issue, it's across the city. So these are decisions that the mayor and this administration are making. They will have ramifications, and whether your principal concern is crime or the encampments in the parks or the congestion across the city, that doesn't seem to be the priority of this mayor or this council right now. It's performative things like renaming Sankofa Square. And I just think that moves the city in the wrong direction. It makes Toronto a less safe city to live in and less hospitable place, not a great place to raise a family. And that's what I'm hearing from people.
Councillor Bradford, thanks for the time.
Thank you very much.
Let us know what you think. Drop a comment down below. Share this on social media. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.